History remembers Grindelwald as a tyrant. Before Voldemort, before the Deathly Hallows were hunted, there was a boy whose magic obeyed him too perfectly, and a world that feared him too slowly. This is the truth buried beneath Ariana Dumbledore's death, beneath the silence Albus kept for decades, beneath the records the wizarding world sealed away. Traveller, stay with me until the end, because Grindelwald's final act is the darkest secret the films never revealed. This is the origins of Gellert Grindelwald. Ah, greetings, traveller. You've found your way back to the Silver Quill Corner. I am Grayfen, the story keeper. Long ago, when I was bound to an ancient wizarding family, I learned that stories carry a magic older than time itself. Here, we drift through wizarding tales, enchanted histories, and the deeper lore of the Harry Potter world, drawn from every shadowed corner of magic. If the murmur of quills and the echo of old corridors bring you peace, press like, subscribe. The bells have been heard across the world tonight. Tell me, Keeper, from what city, realm, or corner of the world are you listening? I'd love to know how far these stories have reached. He came into the world the way winter arrives in the old countries, quietly, deliberately. And when he arrived, the air itself seemed to shift, as though something unseen had just stepped into its proper place. Outside, snow pressed its weight onto crooked rooftops in a nameless Central European village. Chimneys leaned like old men trading secrets. Wind slid through the wooden slats of narrow houses, carrying other people's stories with it. Inside, dim, smoky, fragrant with time and old timber, a single candle trembled above a brass-framed bed. The year was 1882. His mother, her name already fading into the polite erasures of old families, held him against worn linen. The midwife whispered an old protective charm, her hands trembling. The mother merely watched him, feeling the room tighten around the infant, as if the very air were waiting to see what he might decide to become. He did not cry. He observed. His magic crept in quietly, like frost tracing the edges of a window. No shattering china, no levitating toys. His magic did not burst. It behaved. At 4, he drew patterns through frost with one careful finger. Not scribbles, spirals, sigils, lines with intent. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. Old bagshot blood, continental branches, a boy to watch. Gellert listened to whispers the way other children listened to lullabies. By 6, the questions began. "Why do we hide?" he asked his uncle, watching Muggle soldiers trudge past the village road. "If we are the ones with power." His uncle stammered something about laws, danger, secrecy. But his eyes betrayed him. Fear, not conviction. "Whose laws?" the boy murmured, rolling the thought across his tongue like a new spell. He didn't ask again. Other children never knew what to make of him. They tumbled through snowfields, building fortresses destined to collapse within the hour. Gellert joined them once, learned the rhythm of their games in minutes. He preferred systems he could shape. He was not cruel, not yet. At night, when lamps died and the hush of snow swallowed every sound, he lay awake beneath carved rafters, imagining stars he could not see, stars governed by laws he could almost feel humming behind his ribs. His family loved him in the manner of old wizarding houses. Tutors too early, etiquette too strict, books corrected if he held them improperly. Affection shaped through expectation. Once, he watched a traveling wizard repair a beam inside the village inn. The wand flicked, elegant but wasteful, magic splashing everywhere like spilled light. That night, Gellert mimicked the gesture in the manor's unused attic. No wand, only will. Magic stirred, curious, obedient. When he reached 11, owls dusted snow from their wings as they delivered letters across the region. Some children dreamed of Britain, Hogwarts with its warm hearths and friendly banners. Gellert did not. He was drawn north. Durmstrang, a name spoken with equal parts awe and unease, a school that studied darkness without apology, a place that sharpened ambition rather than sanding it down. His acceptance letter arrived sealed with antlered sigils. On the morning he departed, the village road shone slick with ice. He paused at the manor threshold. His mother stood behind him, lips pressed thin, holding every warning she knew he would not obey. He stepped into the cold. Snowflakes drifted, listening. One landed on his glove and melted instantly. "Power should answer to purpose," he whispered. Only the wind heard him, and carried the vow across fields, over rooftops, beyond borders and rivers and sleeping cities, toward the northern sea, toward the school that would sharpen everything within him the world should have feared far earlier. Tom Riddle had yet to draw breath. The elder wand still dreamed in another man's hand. Albus Dumbledore lived quietly in another village, not yet knowing his future would be braided painfully, with the boy trudging north. Durmstrang did not welcome its students. It bound them to its cold stone halls, as though the very cliffs had awakened to claim their lives for its traditions. The fortress rose from the northern cliffs like a weapon half forged in ice, its towers jagged as broken steel, its slit-thin windows watching the horizon with patient malice. Storms older than most bloodlines had blackened its stone, and the lake beneath it reflected nothing at all, as if the water refused to admit the world above existed. Gellert walked alone. Durmstrang's great doors opened without a whisper. They yielded, as though the fortress itself acknowledged a threat entering its boundaries. Inside, the air was colder than the storm outside. Torches burned low and mean, jealous of their heat. Runes writhed across the walls like scars that refused to heal, each one a record of ambition carved deep enough to bleed stone. Silence was the first lesson here, and it tolerated no defiance. By the third morning, the professor of defensive arts marched them into the dueling hall. The room felt like a battlefield that had learned to hold its breath, walls cratered by impact spells, columns blackened by strikes that had once lit the air white. "Magic," the professor said, his voice hard as hammered iron, "was not crafted to comfort you. It exists to test the limits of the world and the limits of you." He flicked his wand. A training dummy detonated into splinters, then stitched itself back together, obedient as a soldier under command. Control, destruction, restoration, all in the span of a heartbeat. The class recoiled. Gellert's eyes thinned to slits. He examined the spell with surgical calm. One professor marked his name that day. By winter, the entire faculty spoke it with caution. In charms, his wandwork cut the air with the finality of a scalpel. In transfiguration, he consumed lessons before the speakers themselves could finish them. In runes, he traced the lineage of symbols, exposing faults in scripts older than the very walls. He rarely troubled the air with his voice, but when he did, stillness followed. He stumbled on the first breath of the Hallows in the library, a faded scribble in a guttered margin, triangle, circle, line. Gellert never dismissed anomalies, he hunted them. What began as a symbol became a map. What began as a myth resolved into a pattern, a wand that could not be bested, a stone that coaxed echoes from the dead, a cloak that erased the line between hunter and hunted. Individually, curiosities, together, revolution. He began a private ledger, triangle, circle, line, purpose. By 13, Durmstrang had begun to orbit him. He did not seek followers, he sought variables. One afternoon, a duel between two older boys ignited over bloodline slurs. Wands raised, pride swollen, arrogance drowning skill. Gellert stepped between them before either curse left a tongue. No spell, no warning. Both wands snapped upward and flew neatly into his hands. "Power without control isn't power," he said. "It's noise." The fight collapsed on itself. Rumors sharpened. Students watched him the way soldiers watch a commander they never chose, but would follow into a war they knew they'd lose. He didn't inspire loyalty, he generated gravity. Then the experiments began. Not cruelty, inquiry, a charm to smudge fear at its edges, a hex to confine pain to a single trembling nerve, a ward that tightened like a noose around spoken lies. He refined them with a sculptor's patience. He recorded them with a scientist's hunger. He adjusted them with a visionary's lack of hesitation. But all inquiries travel toward a boundary, and boundaries exist because someone, somewhere, is afraid of what lies past them. One night, a boy came to him, a classmate, equal in age but not in conviction, eyes glassy with shame, begging to be remade into something stronger, something unshakable. Gellert observed the plea, not the person. To him, the boy was an offering, a variable that had volunteered. He cast the altered charm. Its lines were perfect, its purpose crystalline. For a brief, exquisite second, the spell held. Then the magic kinked, twisting upon itself like a snapped wire. The scream that followed did not ring, it clung. A sound with fingers, gripping stone, settling under the skin of the room. Gellert ended the spell at once, but the damage had already ripened. The boy lived. His eyes, however, stared as if seeing through frost, alive yet unreachable. Durmstrang observes brilliance with pride. It observes damage with concern. He had begun to demonstrate both. The headmaster summoned him to a chamber where the air itself seemed to recoil. "You are the most formidable mind produced here in generations," the man said. "But brilliance without conscience is a weapon that eventually turns inward." A parchment lay waiting, expulsion, a verdict dressed as administrative procedure. Gellert studied it with mild interest, as if assessing the tensile strength of a material he'd already outgrown. No shame, no fear, just clarity. Durmstrang had finished teaching him, and he had not finished learning. He departed at first light, carrying robes, journals, and the ledger marked with the hallows. Passing through the courtyard, he noted the hidden sigils he'd etched into architecture, quiet claims on a place that could not contain him. Durmstrang would forget the forgettable, but it would remember the anomaly. Outside the iron gates stretched a world full of weaknesses mislabeled as traditions, old magic half-buried, old lineages clinging to relics they didn't deserve, old myths whispering their first invitations. They said he was dangerous, unstable, too extreme for a school that welcomed extremity. Gellert Grindelwald heard only confirmation. Beginnings rarely announce themselves politely. He stepped into the snow, toward Europe, toward Godric's Hollow, toward the brilliant boy destiny had placed on his axis, and toward a century he intended to re-engineer from its roots. The world had drawn its line. Gellert's only instinct was to move it. Exile did not break Gellert Grindelwald. It refined him, like heat tempering a blade meant to cut the century open. Durmstrang's iron gates slammed shut behind him, a single metallic verdict ringing through frost and silence, and he walked on without granting them so much as a backward glance, as though the institution had simply reached the limit of what it could offer a mind like his. Snow collected on his eyelashes in delicate white fragments, not sorrow, not regret, just weather daring to touch him. By the time he reached the road, he had already rewritten the narrative in his mind. Expulsion was not punishment, it was confirmation. Durmstrang had not cast him out, it had confessed its own inadequacy. He stepped into the northern cold the way some men step onto a throne, not claiming power, but recognizing it had been his all along. Europe shifted beneath him like a restless giant. Rail lines carved through mountains like iron arteries, carrying the pulse of a world accelerating beyond its own wisdom. Factories exhaled smoke into skies older than the Statute of Secrecy, as if muggles were trying to invent their way toward magic and failing loudly. Muggles drilled with rifles that spat metal faster than most wizards could shape a thought. Weapons that required no wand, no will, only the pull of a trigger. Crude brilliance, chaotic efficiency. In polished drawing rooms and behind ministry doors, wizards whispered like frightened heirs guarding a crumbling legacy. They fretted about muggle volatility, about the accelerating pace of change, as though history itself were misbehaving. Gellert watched all of it with a fascination so sharp it bordered on reverence. This, he thought, as a train screamed into a station with the force of a creature desperate to outrun its own creation, is what happens when power evolves with no one worthy to command it. Not disgust, not fear. Diagnosis. In Berlin, he sat in the shadowed corner of a crowded cafe, boots thawing beside a radiator that hissed like an offended serpent. The air smelled of ink, coal, and impatience. Outside, a regiment of Muggle soldiers marched past in flawless formation, boots hammering cobblestones in a rhythm so precise it resembled spellcraft, power shaped through discipline instead of magic. An older witch at the next table noticed his gaze. She stirred her coffee with unnecessary force, porcelain trembling. "They're preparing for war," she muttered. "The fools always are." Gellert did not bother to turn. "Everyone prepares for the future they believe is coming," he said softly. "And you? What do you believe is coming?" Another rifle lifted, locked into place. Frost bloomed under his fingertips on the window pane, a delicate geometry only he understood. "Chaos," he murmured, "unless someone worthy intervenes." The woman shivered and pulled her shawl close. The cafe was warm. His wandering became an education the world never intended to give him. He learned in mountain monasteries where hedge wizards once trained before the great schools claimed authority. He learned in ruins buried under moss where ancient wards still woke at his presence and tested his worth. He learned in private collections guarded by old families who treated grimoires like decorative relics. Gellert traded charm for entry, brilliance for tolerance, silence for secrets. And when charm failed, he used other tools. In Prague, a grey-bearded archivist blocked his path to a sealed wing. "That section is forbidden," the man said. "Dangerous. Not for students. Not for you." Gellert's expression did not shift. "Of course," he replied politely. "You're quite right." That night, when the archive lamps guttered low, he returned. The archivist looked up as Gellert approached. Suspicion flickered, brief, instinctive. Gellert's wand moved with the softness of a breath, not a curse, a correction of memory, a gentle redirection, the kind only a mind already half-willing would accept. "You've already cleared me for the Eastern Wing," he murmured. The man blinked. Confusion fluttered, then folded itself away. "Yes, of course. The Eastern Wing, I remember." Gellert passed him without sound, stepping into shelves that had not felt human breath in decades. By morning, the archivist woke with a headache and the uneasy sense that something important had slipped between his fingers. Gellert woke with new notes in his ledger, and the deeper he moved into the continent, the older the magic became. In a Carpathian cloister, Orthodox icons watched him with cracked gold eyes as he crossed a stone courtyard. The monks knew what he was. They knew enough to fear what kind. "Some books are not meant to be read," the abbot warned in careful German. "Then why write them?" Gellert asked, perfectly polite. Silence answered him. He found the book anyway. It lay behind rusted iron in a vault that smelled of cold metal and older fear, black leather, clasp etched with a symbol nearly worn away. Inside, fragments, not a treatise, not a history, whispers, a wand unbeaten in any duel, a stone that stirred the shadows of the dead, a cloak that let its wearer slip past death like smoke through fingers, not fairy tales, not to him, patterns, blueprints. The Deathly Hallows were no longer stories, they were instructions. He copied everything into his ledger, handwriting crisp even as his pulse quickened. Triangle, circle, line. When he finally slept that night, it was beneath a fresco of a robed wizard lifting a wand toward a sky full of painted stars. The colors had faded, the plaster cracked, but the intent bled through the centuries. For the first time, Gellert felt something settle around him like a tightening ring. Not fear, not doom, outline, purpose taking shape. Limitations, he thought, tracing the fractured constellations. Those are the true enemies. And enemies could be broken. His travels continued across Russia, Poland, Vienna, tracking rumors of ancient magic and older vendettas. Everywhere he went, he found the same truth. Wizards living in the seams of Muggle cities like forgotten spells, allowed to wilt rather than flourish. They were not weak. They were trained, indoctrinated, to believe that smallness was safety. So he asked questions, in taverns lit by guttering candles, in back rooms thick with pipe smoke, in abandoned dueling halls where scorch marks clung to stone like ghosts. Why do we hide from people who cannot match us? What if someone competent decided when wars ended? What if the statute of secrecy isn't protection, but a leash we've convinced ourselves to love? Some scoffed. Some called him reckless. Some whispered mad. But none walked away untouched. On those nights, Gellert learned something crucial. Wands were not the only instruments of power. Words were, vision was. Influence was a kind of magic, one that did not need incantations to alter a room, and he was very, very good at it. But brilliance exacts attacks. His came in solitude. Loneliness followed him through cities and border crossings, quiet as a well-trained servant. There were admirers, yes, followers, acolytes eager for instruction, but none could stand beside him. No equal, no mirror, no mind sharp enough to meet his and strike sparks. He sat in a railway carriage watching snow smear across the glass, thinking not of conquest, but of something more elusive. Resistance, intellectual resistance. Someone must exist, he thought, who can match my pace. Someone who sees the world's fractures with the same clarity and the same impatience. Across the sea, another boy, Albus Dumbledore, was finishing school with high honors and heavy grief. Brilliant, restless, caged by duty and ghosts. Two prodigies orbiting the same century. Two storms gathering on opposite horizons. Spring softened Europe. Snow retreated. Rivers swelled, cities exhaled color again. For Gellert, wandering sharpened into direction. The Hallows were real. Wizardkind was adrift. He possessed clarity, vision, and the will to act. What he lacked was a counterpart, not a subordinate, not a worshipper, a partner, a co-architect. The first hint arrived in ink. Batilda Bagshot, renowned historian, author, and his great-aunt had been sending letters for years, but recently her tone changed. She wrote of an old village in Britain, of a family with a complicated past, of a boy whose name she underlined once, then never again, Albus Dumbledore. His essays, his theories, his promise. Gellert read every word, then read between them. Here, perhaps, was the mind he had been waiting for, Godric's Hollow. He bought a train ticket with his last coins. Gold speaks all languages. The train exhaled steam like a weary dragon. As it lurched forward, landscapes blurred, fields, then cities, then the stony ribs of distant hills. Gellert rested his fingers on the leather of his Hallows ledger. Triangle, circle, line. For the first time, his wandering felt less like escape and more like arrival. He did not yet know that a single summer in an English village would become the brightest ascent and deepest fault line of his life. He did not yet see the duel decades ahead that would tear history in two. He only knew this. Exile had not diminished him, it had honed him. And now, at last, he was moving towards something someone worthy of the edge. Godric's Hollow was not a village so much as a crossroads in history. It sat cupped between low English hills, a cluster of roofs and chimneys worn smooth by wind and time. Muggles saw a sleepy parish, a church spire, a war memorial in the square. Wizards saw something else. Old magic ran under the soil here like buried rivers. Gryffindor's shadow, Peveril blood. Centuries of quiet power layered so thick the air felt slightly heavier when you stepped off the road. Gellert Grindelwald felt it the moment his boots touched the lane. Not the showy, brittle magic of dueling halls, not the raw, wild current of storms. This was older, settled, foundational. The kind of place where the world liked to put turning points. Twilight slicked the cobblestones with the last of a summer rain. Lavender and wet stone rose from back gardens behind wrought iron fences. Lamps floated on in windows one by one, answering some invisible roll call. A single lantern on a crooked post flickered to life, its flame bending to the wind as if in reluctant greeting. Gellert paused at the edge of the square. Children chased each other around the war memorial, shrieking in the way only those untouched by history can. A village that hid its truths in plain sight. He felt something like satisfaction slide through him. Of course, he thought, a place like this would gather stories, and stories attract power. He adjusted his coat and moved along the lane toward the house he sought. The one Batilda's letters had described in careful, understated script. Batilda Bagshot, historian, chronicler of wizarding wars and foolishness, and, inconveniently, his great-aunt. Her cottage leaned slightly toward the lane, as though eavesdropping. Ivy gripped the stone. The brass knocker shaped like a griffin's head had been polished by generations of anxious visitors. Gellert raised his hand to knock. The door opened before he could touch it. The charm on it was old and tired, lingering from a century when doors needed to recognize their owners. The magic stuttered as it moved, but it obeyed. Batilda stood framed in lamplight, a small, thin woman wrapped in more shawls than strictly necessary, eyes bright and sharp in a face carved by time. "You must be my Gellert," she said, as though he had merely stepped in from the garden rather than crossed a continent. He inclined his head. "Aunt Batilda." Her gaze flicked over him. Coat, boots, wand callus on his fingers, the quiet calculation in his eyes. "You've brought the weather with you. Come in before it decides to stay." He stepped inside. The house swallowed him in warmth and chaos. Books everywhere, on shelves, on chairs, stacked in crooked towers that leaned like they were whispering to each other. Maps papered the walls, battle lines, political borders, diagrams of magical migrations. A kettle poured itself onto a fragile-looking tea service. Quills shuffled into new formations on their own. A rolled-up scroll unfurled an inch as he passed, as if trying to eavesdrop. Here, knowledge did not sit politely on shelves. It fidgeted. It breathed. Gellert liked the house immediately. Batilda shuffled ahead of him into a sitting room so full of parchment, it seemed the furniture had grown out of it. "Sit," she said, indicating a chair that kindly evicted a stack of books to make room for him. "I have been hearing about you, you know." He allowed himself a small, amused smile. "Durmstrang has a talent for dramatics." "Durmstrang always did," she sniffed. "They call it twisted, when brilliance refuses to stop at the same cliff edge as everyone else." Her eyes narrowed. "You are more than clever, Gellert. That is why you concern them, and why you concern me." "Do I?" he asked lightly. She poured tea. The steam curled up in symbols he recognized from old war texts. She did not bother to dispel it. Boys who ask the wrong questions are dangerous. Boys who find answers are worse. He accepted the cup. "And yet you invited me." "I invited you," she said, Because history has a habit of ignoring the right questions until the wrong people start asking them. I prefer to know which kind you are." Her gaze met his, steady. Most adults flinched first, averted their eyes, changed the subject. Batilda did not. He felt a small, rare flicker of respect. "I came for understanding," he said, "for records not on public shelves, for truths that survived being inconvenient." "Truths," she echoed as though weighing the word. "Not stories, not propaganda, not the version the ministry prefers. Those I can get anywhere," he said. A corner of her mouth twitched. "You really are a bagshot." Her eyes dipped briefly to the leather notebook at his belt. The cover was plain. The symbol burned quietly into the corner was not. Triangle, circle, line. Her gaze sharpened. "I suppose," she murmured, almost to herself, it was only a matter of time before someone clever decided the Hallows were more than a bedtime story. He did not look down, did not react, only lifted his tea to his lips. "I read," he said mildly. "Your own work suggests they're stitched through more than legend." "My work," she said, voice dry, "suggests that obsession with the Hallows tends to end badly." "I'm not obsessed," he replied. He was, just not foolish enough to confess it. Batilda watched him for a long, disconcerting moment. "I know old things," she said at last. "Very old. Some of them bite, some of them refuse to let go. I will show you what I can, if you remember that history is full of men who believed they could hold a legend without being held by it. That," he said softly, "is why I study them, so I can see where they failed." Her laugh was quiet and not entirely kind. "Yes, you are definitely my nephew." She showed him the small room under the eaves. The ceiling sloped low enough that he had to tilt his head. Rain whispered on the roof. A narrow window overlooked the square. From here he could see the church spire, the war memorial, the lanterns winking on one by one as evening deepened. "A few weeks," she said. "No more. I am too old to host revolutions." "Revolutions don't need houses," Gellert answered. "Only ideas." Her eyes glinted. "Try not to burn my books while you're having them." That night, Godric's Hollow creaked and settled around him. The floorboards spoke in old wood language. Enchanted pages turned themselves 2 rooms away. Somewhere outside, a dog barked at something only it could see. The magic of the village. Not loud, but layered, pressed against his awareness like a hand. He slept badly. He always did before something important. In the morning, he walked. He traced the outline of the square, noted where Muggles' notice slid past concealed doorways, watched how witches and wizards slipped in and out of sight with the ease of those who had never known inquisitions or pogroms, only the comfortable hush of long-standing secrecy. He found the churchyard. Muggle names lined the gravestones nearest the path. Farther back, the letters warped, older, stranger. A few stones hummed so faintly with enchantments that only a mind tuned to them would notice. On one weather-softened marker, a symbol had been carved with reverent care. Triangle, circle, line. Time had tried to wear it away. It hadn't quite succeeded. He stood before it for a very long time. Here, the story whispered, the third brother, the cloak that truly hid, a bloodline that refused to die. He felt no awe, only confirmation. The Hallows were not abstractions. They had addresses. He moved through the village like a scholar and like a scout. He watched how people greeted Batilda, light, fond, trusting. How children ran to her gate with questions. How neighbors leaned close when she spoke in the square. Power, he thought, tracing the pattern, did not always announce itself with wands drawn. Sometimes it looked like an old woman telling stories, and a village quietly shaping itself around what she chose to remember. He had always known how to frighten people. Durmstrang had taught him how to impress them. Godric's Hollow taught him something far more valuable, People gave their lives for those who made them feel necessary, not dominated, not intimidated, needed. If you could convince someone that their small existence mattered in the arc of something vast, that they were a spoke in a great turning wheel, they would walk into fire for you. It was an elegant truth, dangerous in the right hands, his hands. It happened quietly the first time he saw him, not in some staged introduction, not beneath a dramatic storm, simply a boy crossing the lane. Gellert was halfway down Batilda's garden path, a book still in his hand, when movement caught at the edge of his vision. A figure stepped out from a gate 2 houses away, tall for his age, shoulders carrying more than a school bag should account for. An armful of books rested against his side, pages splayed with use. His hair caught the late afternoon light, a russet gold tangle that looked like it resented being combed. He walked with a curious combination of weariness and purpose, as if part of him slogged through mud while the rest had already reached wherever he was going. He paused to exchange a few words with a neighbor. His smile was polite, distant, distracted. His eyes, when they flicked up toward the hills, were something else entirely, sharp, hungry, bright as a match struck in a dark room. The air between them did something Gellert had no spell for. It tightened, aligned, noticed. The boy did not see him, not yet, but Gellert felt it with the clarity of a ward ringing under intrusion. Here, there, that one. A mind, not merely clever. He had met clever. This was something rarer. A mirror polished differently, a storm tuned to a nearby frequency. Batilda's voice drifted from behind him, dry as old parchment. "That," she said, "is Albus." The name hung in the air like a struck chord. "Dumbledore?" Gellert asked, though some instinct in him already knew. She nodded, watching the young man disappear around the bend. "Graduated top of his year, every year. They say the headmaster wanted to chain him to a desk at Hogwarts before the ink on his NEUTs was dry. And he came back here," Gellert said slowly, "to this, to a house that needs him more than the world does, for now." Something in her tone tightened. Brilliance does not always get to choose its first prison. Gellert's eyes tracked the spot where Albus had vanished. "He looks," he began, then stopped, searching for a word precise enough. "Contained," Batilda supplied. "The way a dam contains a river." He hummed agreement. Contained was a temporary state. He could feel it. "Is he like me?" Gellert asked at last, not out of insecurity but classification. Batilda's gaze slid sideways to him. "He is like himself," she said, "which is dangerous enough for you both." A warning, noted, set aside. That night, Gellert sat at the small desk under the eaves, the roof sloping low above his head. He opened his ledger, not to the page of Hallow's sigils, not to the notes on Durmstrang's failures. He started a new page. Godric's Hollow, junction of old magic, muggle and wizard histories layered. Batilda, conduit, knows more than she records, censorship by choice, not fear. Local wizarding population, compliant, content, safe, untapped. Graveyard, Peveril symbol confirmed, Hallows rooted in actual bloodline. And today, Albus Dumbledore. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before writing the name, then underlined it once. Potential, he noted. Power, restraint, guilt, intelligence, isolation. All the volatile ingredients of someone who might understand what he intended to do with the world and help him do it faster. He did not write the other thought, the quieter one. At last, an equal. Outside, the village settled into sleep. The church bell tolled the hour. Rain began again, whispering across the roof like pages being turned. Somewhere beyond the hills, Europe shifted restlessly toward another war. Inside a crooked cottage in Godric's Hollow, two of the greatest wizards of the age were separated by little more than a few houses, a lane, and a handful of days. They did not yet know how thoroughly they would divide the century between them. They did not know they would spend the rest of their lives orbiting the same wound. Tomorrow, Bathilda would make introductions, tea would be poured, ideas would spark like flint on steel. For now, Gellert closed his ledger and blew out the candle. The room fell into darkness. The magic in the walls hummed, quiet, anticipatory, as if even the village understood that history had just taken a breath. It would be a very long time exhaling. Morning broke quietly over Godric's Hollow, as though afraid to disturb the boy now sleeping beneath Bathilda's eaves. It was the kind of dawn that softened even the sharpest thoughts, light slipping through lace curtains, dust drifting like slow magic, the house breathing with its old, familiar creaks. Gellert Grindelwald woke into it with the alert stillness of someone who had never quite learned the meaning of rest. Bathilda's home carried history the way other houses carried warmth, stacked on shelves, layered beneath floorboards, tucked into corners where memory gathered. Books shifted of their own accord, rearranging themselves into constellations of ideas. Old parchment rustled when no wind stirred. Runes etched into forgotten spines pulsed faintly, as though recognizing someone who could finally read them properly. Here, knowledge was alive, and knowledge, at last, had noticed him. Gellert descended the narrow staircase each morning into the soft chaos of Bathilda's study. A room overflowing with manuscripts older than most countries, maps charting civilizations that had risen and crumbled, letters whose ink still held the pulse of their writers. It was a place where scholars had whispered, argued, and dreamed for generations. He understood it instantly. He belonged in rooms where the future was being quietly rewritten. Bathilda did not hover. She drifted instead, refilling ink pots without looking, nudging stacks of parchment closer to him, opening windows when ideas grew too dense for the room to hold. She watched him work with a curiosity tempered by respect. There was something in him she recognized, a hunger sharpened not by malice, but by certainty. On the second morning, she left him alone entirely. She understood prodigies. They needed space to ignite. Ignite he did. The Deathly Hallows emerged from her collection not as myth, but as fragments of a pattern the world had arranged in pieces, waiting perhaps for someone like him to assemble them. A wand, undefeated, a stone that conversed with shadows, a cloak that defied death itself. Old stories whispered by shepherds, monks, warlocks, children, no single account reliable, but all pointing towards something real, something deliberate. Gellert studied each scrap with a precision that bordered on reverence, though not the gentle kind. Each symbol felt like a challenge, a clue in a puzzle left unsolved for too long. He followed their threads deeper, letting possibility take shape in the margins of his mind. And still, something tugged at him, a presence, a mind he had glimpsed only from a distance. The boy. He saw Albus Dumbledore for the second time, not through windows or from across a lane, but in the quiet clearing behind the cottage where wildflowers bowed beneath the weight of early summer. Albus walked with the measured grace of someone trained to carry burdens carefully, so carefully they did not slip or break. His posture held a strange mixture of restraint and longing, like a violin string tuned 1 degree too tight. Gellert recognized the look. It was the expression brilliance wore before someone told it what it was allowed to be. Their paths did not cross deliberately that morning. They simply converged. Two trajectories the world had been nudging toward each other for years. It happened in the span of a breath, a glance, a recognition that did not require words. They studied one another the way scholars study rare phenomena, quietly, intently, and with the faint electric awareness that the ground beneath them had just shifted. From that point, the days unfolded not gently, but inevitably. They met each morning, not arranged, simply aligned, beneath the eaves of Bathilda's roof or beneath the branches of the lone beech tree that overlooked the square. Ideas moved between them with the ease of migrating birds, here, then there, shifting, adapting, lifting. The Hallows lay scattered across their discussions like stars arranged just slightly wrong, waiting for them to correct the sky. Together they discovered speed. Together they discovered altitude. Brilliance fed brilliance, and the world around them blurred. Albus had always been a thinker who measured 10 angles before committing to one. Gellert had always been a force who broke angles until they obeyed his will. Between them formed a current, clean, fierce, intoxicating in its precision. They worked not as rivals or companions, but as two halves of a mind cleaved by time and reunited by chance. Afternoons lengthened into evenings. Evenings lengthened into nights. Ideas lengthened into visions. For the greater good, it began not as a declaration, but as an observation, a phrase Gellert shaped carefully in his mind, refined like a blade, then placed gently into Albus's hands. A philosophy disguised as mercy, a promise wrapped in light. Albus felt the pull of it, the elegance, the order, the possibility. Grief made him vulnerable. Brilliance made him susceptible. Responsibility made him hopeful. It was the first philosophy he encountered that felt powerful enough to fix a world that had already taken too much from him. He did not see the shadow behind it, not yet, but Godric's hollow did. The air around them tightened. The ground seemed to steady itself as though bracing. Even the birds grew cautious when their conversations deepened. Batilda watched them with growing unease. Aberforth watched with quiet suspicion. And Ariana felt every shift in the house like a tremor beneath her ribs. Her magic, delicate and fractured, curled inward whenever the boys approached. She was a quiet star, collapsing under the weight of a childhood carved by terror. Her presence shaped the house. Her pain shaped her brothers. And though neither Albus nor Gellert meant to disturb her, their ideas moved through the air with too much force for fragile magic to bear. Gellert noticed her only in glimpses, a shadow slipping up a staircase, a flinch at a raised voice, a tremor in the magic of the house when ambition swelled too sharply. He saw tragedy the way a strategist sees structural weakness, quietly, analytically, without understanding the consequences. But consequences were coming, the kind that rewrite lifetimes, the kind that end summers, the kind that no prophecy warns of, because fate sometimes steps aside and lets human choices build their own apocalypse. It began with Aberforth. He found them arguing, voices too sharp, ideas too vast for a house that had held too much grief already. Ariana stood in the doorway behind him, trembling, magic flickering like a candle caught in wind. "What are you doing to her?" Aberforth snapped, shoving himself between his sister and the storm of ambition gathering around the table. Gellert straightened. "We are talking about the future." "She is not part of your future," Aberforth roared. "She's my sister, not a theory, not a symbol, not a casualty waiting for your brilliant plans." Albus flinched at every word, because each one was true. Gellert stepped forward, indignation rising. With the Hallows, she would never have to hide again. Wizards would never have to... Aberforth's wand was out in an instant. "You don't get to remake the world," he said, voice shaking with fury and fear. "You don't even understand this one." A pressure snapped through the air. Then 3 wands were raised, not in hatred, not in intent to harm, in fear. Fear of losing control, fear of losing each other, fear of the futures they had begun to imagine. Ariana whimpered. Her magic surged, wild, raw, reflexive, a wave of terrified force that made the wallpaper ripple and books shudder on their shelves. Aberforth moved to shield her. Albus moved to calm the room. Gellert moved to stop Aberforth before the argument destroyed everything they'd built. Their spells collided, light on light, force on force, 3 wills crashing into a single point too fragile to bear their brilliance. Ariana stepped forward into the crossfire, not to intervene, but because the storm pulled her like gravity. A flash, a crack, a burst of magic that twisted the light in the room. And then, silence. The kind that follows catastrophe, the kind that breaks centuries. Ariana fell. Aberforth screamed. Albus staggered. Gellert froze, horrified, breath shattering in his throat. For a moment, the world held all three boys in its palm. Then it dropped them. Aberforth hurled himself at Gellert with a grief so explosive it was almost magic. Albus dropped to his knees beside his sister, whispering her name as if saying it softly enough might undo the universe. Gellert backed toward the door, each step cracking the foundation of who he had been that morning. He had not meant it, he had not foreseen it, yet he understood one thing with brutal clarity. Power without control was ruin. It would never ruin him again. He fled Godric's Hollow before Aberforth's rage could reach him, through the garden gate, into the darkening lane where the summer's warmth had died in an instant. Behind him, the Dumbledore home cracked open with grief. Before him, a world full of fear and potential waited. Something inside him hardened. Conviction replaced vision. Doctrine replaced curiosity. Purpose replaced possibility. This was the day Gellert Grindelwald stopped dreaming and began becoming. He walked into the night not as a boy fleeing tragedy, but as a future darkening into shape. Summer ended. The dream ended, and history braced itself. For Gellert Grindelwald had just begun. Grindelwald did not run from Godric's Hollow. He tore himself out of it, as though the village had become a burning shell around him, and he alone carried the flame. The night swallowed his footsteps with ruthless efficiency, yet the rhythm of his heartbeat followed him across the fields. A violent echo of the spell that had ended Ariana's life and shattered the last illusion of his own invincibility. For days he traveled without aim, a shadow drifting through forests and forgotten towns, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the unbearable clarity that one moment had split his existence cleanly in two, the boy he had been and the force he was becoming. Sleep betrayed him. Every time he closed his eyes, Ariana's fall replayed, not as guilt, he refused that word, but as a violent theorem carved into his marrow. Power that hesitates destroys everything. He dissected the duel with the precision of a scholar studying catastrophe. Every movement, every misfire, every flaw, until tragedy became a solved equation rather than a wound. And from that cold understanding rose the fracture. He would never hesitate again. In the lonely miles that followed, something inside him hardened, slowly, irrevocably, a fusion of heartbreak, brilliance, and fury that cooled into a new and merciless shape. The dream he once shared with Albus did not die. It sharpened, shedding softness the way metal sheds impurities. He no longer needed agreement. He no longer needed partnership. He no longer needed love. Vision alone remained. Vision and the resolve to enforce it. If the world could take a girl like Ariana and break her simply for existing, then the world did not deserve mercy. This thought did not horrify him, it steadied him. In the mountain passes of Slovakia, he began forging new spells, severe, elegant, breathtaking in their brutality, magic that allowed no room for error and even less room for sentiment. Magic answered him differently now. It leaned toward him, as though recognizing what he was shaping himself into. He welcomed the shift. Whispers spread quickly along the margins of Europe. A young wizard traveling alone, carrying the composure of prophecy and the cold patience of someone measuring the world for weaknesses. The first to follow him were the disillusioned, students expelled, wanderers without anchor, witches and wizards whose talents were suffocating beneath governments that feared what they could not control. Grindelwald did not offer power. He offered purpose. He spoke the language of inevitability, the language of wounds demanding correction. They listened. because he spoke like someone who had stood at the edge of ruin and returned sharpened rather than shattered. When they asked about his past, he deflected with a precision colder than any lie. Godric's hollow became a sealed vault inside him, untouched, unspoken, weaponized only in silence. Ariana's death had not turned him away from his path. It had removed the last obstacle between ambition and conviction. He no longer sought justice. He sought correction. He no longer dreamed of guiding the world. He dreamed of remaking it. The boy who once envisioned change had become the hand that would deliver it. One night, in a half-collapsed fortress in the Carpathians, a follower asked what drove him. Firelight carved Grindelwald's face into sharp geometry, a face not born, but chiseled. "Because the world punishes the gentle," he said softly, "and rewards the ruthless with opportunity." He turned toward the black window, toward the vast, sleeping continent that did not yet know the shape of the storm rising against it. If suffering shapes us, then let the world be reshaped accordingly. They mistook the gravity of his conviction for destiny. Grindelwald allowed the misconception to grow. It was useful. Somewhere between the ashes of that fortress and the next ruined border, the boy who once stood in a summer garden beside Albus Dumbledore finally dissolved. In his place stood the architect of a new era, forged from brilliance, fury, and a grief he would never name aloud. Europe would remember him from this moment forward. The Hallows were no longer myth. They were coordinates, and one name surfaced again and again from taverns thick with smoke and backrooms strung with illegal portkeys. Gregorovitch. Not merely a wandmaker, a craftsman so precise that wood and core remembered his hands years later. A rival to Ollivander, unrestrained by tradition, bold enough to pursue legends other wandmakers feared to touch. He had boasted, loudly, foolishly, that he possessed something extraordinary. Grindelwald treated it not as rumor, but as confirmation. From a rooftop overlooking the narrow square, he watched Gregorovitch's workshop for days, the windows fogged with sawdust and steam, the silhouette of a man shaping destinies for other hands. Grindelwald moved at dawn. He entered with the quiet precision of winter entering a house. Gregorovitch sensed him instantly. A wandmaker knows when he is being watched. He turned, stopped, froze. The young wizard who faced him had the stillness of an assassin and the eyes of someone who expected the world to obey. "Get out," Gregorovitch barked. "I have nothing for the likes of you." Grindelwald said nothing. Names were too small for what he intended. His gaze moved past the wandmaker to the high shelf where a single long box rested. He felt it. The Elder Wand did not sing, it resonated. A quiet, ancient vibration beneath the skin, like the memory of a storm. Gregorovitch's face tightened. "It is mine," he snapped. "You do not understand that wand." Grindelwald moved. He crossed the workshop in a blur, half propulsion charm, half disarmament, a spell as elegant as it was merciless. Gregorovitch flew backward. His wand skittered away across the floor. Grindelwald leapt, fingers closing around the Elder Wand's handle. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the world tilted. Power surged through him like a river reclaiming its natural channel. Pure, ancient, searching. The wand tested him. It found no weakness. The backlash shattered the window behind him, glass falling like frozen rain. Gregorovitch stared at him in horrified awe. The Elder Wand belonged to him now. Grindelwald did not gloat. He simply looked at it, eyes luminous with recognition, as though he had retrieved a piece of his own future. But another memory flickered behind the triumph. Moonlight, a clearing, blood lifting weightless between two joined hands, a vow sealed into a silver file. We will never move against each other. The blood pact flared. a ghost of a promise he wished he did not remember. The elder wand hummed, wanting purpose. He buried the memory. There was no room in the world he was building for the tenderness he had once shared with Albus Dumbledore. He vanished before Gregorovitch could rise, and from that day on, Europe did not simply feel watched. Europe felt judged. Grindelwald's ascent did not resemble Voldemort's future carnage. It moved like a tide, silent at first, steady, pulling more and more people into its gravity. He spoke not of domination, but of responsibility, of a world where wizard-kind did not hide while muggles built machines that could kill thousands without a single spell. "We do not stand above the world," he told them. "We stand in front of it. Someone must." He removed Ariana from the story, but kept the lesson. Those who listened felt awakened, not to fear, but to purpose. "For the greater good," he said, and to many it felt like absolution. Movements formed, cells acting on his ideas, testing laws, testing borders. Ministries felt the tension rising. Their reports grew frantic, their warnings ignored. People who believe they are building a better world do not turn back. In the high mountains of Central Europe, Grindelwald chose the place where his vision would take stone. Nurmengard rose beneath his wand not like a fortress, but like a decree. Walls carved with enchantments, corridors that spiraled with mathematical precision, cells shaped for punishment, yes, but more importantly, for discipline. At its crown, the symbol of the Hallows gleamed against the sky, triangle, circle, line, a promise to followers, a warning to everyone else. In those stone chambers, his rhetoric sharpened further. He spoke of a world where another Ariana would not break beneath terror, because terror itself would be corrected. He spoke of power no longer hiding behind laws designed to shame it. He always stopped short of admitting the cost. 1945 was already heavy with ghosts long before the world knew the date of the duel. Muggle maps were being redrawn in blood, cities burned on radio reports. Somewhere over Europe, bombs fell through cloud with the indifference of rain. Wizards watched from behind layered wards and outdated laws, telling themselves that hiding was wisdom and not, in truth, fear. Far above one of those scarred landscapes, in the highest tower of Nurmengard, a small crystal vial began to tremble. It had hung there for years in a lattice of enchantments, suspended like a captured star. Inside, a twist of darkened blood and light turned slowly on itself, never quite fading, never quite still. That morning, the light stuttered. Hairline cracks spidered across the glass with the softest of sounds. Too quiet for human ears, loud enough that the magic of the fortress flinched. The vial fractured. Blood and light unwound, unspooling into the air like the last exhale of a long-held promise. The enchantment screamed, then snapped. The blood pact was broken. Across the continent, Albus Dumbledore staggered where he stood in the courtyard of Hogwarts, the winter air frosting his beard. A warmth surged through the old scars on his hand, racing up his arm and into his chest. Painful, familiar, final. For a heartbeat, he tasted summer air, heard laughter in a Godric's hollow lane, saw a boy's hand reaching for his, Gellert. Then it was gone. In Nurmengard, Grindelwald straightened in the tower room where he had been studying the shape of the war below. The elder wand hummed at his side, restless. He felt the absence like a door opening behind him. It was done then. The last cord tying him and Albus safely apart had frayed and failed. He closed his eyes briefly, not in grief, not quite, but in acknowledgement. "So," he murmured to the empty stone, "you found the will at last, Albus." Outside, the world kept warring. Inside, a different battle finally became possible. Dumbledore did not bring an army to Nurmengard. He walked alone through the mountain mist, cloak snapping in the wind, every step a choice he had avoided for far too many years. The fortress rose before him like a verdict, black stone gouging the sky, the symbol of the Hallows etched into its highest spire. He remembered when that symbol had been nothing more than ink on shared parchment, a doodle in the margin of impossible dreams. Now it burned above a prison full of the consequences. The wards tasted him as he approached, old magic recognizing old magic, tangled with memories it had not been built to understand. For a moment they resisted, remembering their master. Then something deeper decided. The gates opened. Corridors whispered as he passed. Chains stirred where prisoners slept fitfully in their cells. Spells set into the stone adjusted their focus, sensing an anomaly, an equal, perhaps a correction. The upper courtyard waited for him, open to a grey sky bruised with distant smoke. Grindelwald stood at its centre, the elder wand held loosely in his hand, black coat moving in the wind like the shadow of a bird deciding whether to fly. For a long breath, neither spoke. They simply looked, really looked, at the man standing where a boy once had. The summer in Godric's Hollow lay between them like an unmarked grave. "Albus," Grindelwald said at last, and his voice carried a familiarity that did not belong in a fortress filled with fear. Dumbledore did not smile. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, carved by decades of responsibility and private shame. "So," he replied quietly, "we've come to the end." A faint, humorless light touched Gellert's mouth. "It never needed to be the end," he said. "You could have come sooner. You could have stood with me. And become the very thing we once swore to resist?" Dumbledore shook his head. "I have spent my life trying not to become the man you invited me to be." "Not become?" Grindelwald's gaze flicked toward the horizon, where Muggle warplanes crossed like steel insects, leaving white scars in the sky. "Look at them, Albus. Look at what they have built while our world hides. Weaponry that wipe out cities in an afternoon. You know what is coming? I wanted to stop it, to guide them before they consume everything, including us." Dumbledore followed his gaze for a moment. The wind tugged at his robes. He looked tired in a way no spell could mend. "You always spoke of saving the world," he said softly, "but you never learned the difference between guidance and domination. You still talk of them and us as though suffering respects such borders." Grindelwald's eyes flashed. "And you still talk as though guilt were a virtue," he said. "How many children have died in this war while you kept your hands clean? Ariana died because we hesitated, because you hesitated. I swore I would never let hesitation kill anyone I could save again." The name hung between them like a curse. Ariana. Dumbledore flinched, as he always would. "I will carry that failure to my grave," he said, "but I will not use it to justify 1,000 more." The elder wand pulsed in Grindelwald's grip, impatient, craving the shape of conflict. Power gathered around him like a storm deciding where to break. "Then you stand in my way," he murmured. Dumbledore looked at him with a sorrow so deep it resembled love turned inside out. "I have always stood in your way," he said. "I simply lacked the courage to admit it." The air tightened. The duel began. No shouted curse announced it, no formal bow, no ritual counting. One moment they faced each other. The next, invisible forces slammed together with a pressure that made the world shudder. Light warped. The courtyard stones buckled, sagging under an impact no Muggle instrument could ever record. A circle of distorted air rippled outward from where their spells collided, peeling frost from the walls, rattling iron chains deep within the fortress. Grindelwald moved first, with the casual precision of a composer striking his opening chord. Fire erupted from the point of the elder wand, not wild, not roaring, but tightly coiled, braided into serpents of molten gold that twisted through the air with sentient intent, fangs bared for Albus alone. Dumbledore answered with a flick that looked almost lazy. The flames unraveled mid-flight, threads of light peeling apart, scattering into a drift of harmless sparks that fell around them like unseasonal fireflies. He did not counter with fire, he countered with gravity. The courtyard floor rose in a jagged wave, stone heaving like a slowed avalanche, trying to engulf Grindelwald in a crushing arc of rock. For a heartbeat, the world itself seemed to tilt. Gellert laughed, not cruelly, but with something like exhilaration. He spun, turning his shield not outward but inward, twisting the oncoming stone into wind. The wave broke apart, transforming into a spiraling gale that tore upward, shredding clouds, then condensed into needles of ice that plunged back toward Dumbledore with lethal speed. Spells collided in midair, shattering into arcs of blue and gold. To the few unfortunate enough to witness it from afar, the duel resembled a storm learning language, lightning that took direction, thunder that reshaped itself into geometry. The Elder Wand amplified every motion Grindelwald made, drawing on reservoirs of magic older than the castle beneath them. Runes sewn into the air flickered around him, binding circles, cutting hexes, time-slowing charms that tried to catch Albus in slivers of thickened reality. Dumbledore slipped between them, not with more raw power, but with ruthless efficiency. He carved paths through enchantments that would have obliterated lesser wizards, altering elements with a thought, turning earth to mist, mist to glass, glass to sand that whirled at his command. This was not the flash and rage of Voldemort's battles. This was artistry. This was two minds that had once built ideas together, now breaking them against each other as weapons. "Look at what we could have done," Grindelwald called over the roar of their colliding magic, redirecting a bolt of Dumbledore's light so it burst into a dome of refracted rays. "Look at what we still might do. The Muggle world burns, Albus. Their bombs fall. Their machines poison the air. Give me the Hallows and we end it. No more Ariana. No more fields filled with children's bones." Dumbledore's next spell faltered for the briefest of instants. The Elder Wand lunged into that gap, surging a column of raw force toward him that cratered the flagstones where he had stood a fraction of a second earlier. He apparated sideways, reappearing on the far edge of the courtyard, robes torn, breath shallow. "And who decides?" he shouted back. "Which lives are spared for your greater good and which are sacrificed to it? You? Me? A tribunal in this fortress? Power does not purify intent, Gellert. It only magnifies what is already there." Grindelwald's face contorted, not in rage alone, but something more complicated. Hurt, frustration, an old unhealed wound. "You think I do not know what I am?" he said, voice hoarse now, the edges of fatigue sharpening it. "I have stared at myself longer than any prison wall will allow. I am not seeking absolution. I am seeking control before chaos devours everything." For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the boiling air. The wind paused. In that pause, the boy from Godric's Hollow flickered through the man, barely, but enough. The boy who had laughed over runes in a cramped study. The boy who had spoken for the greater good like a prayer, not a threat. Albus saw him, and because he saw him, he hesitated. So did Gellert. They both remembered Ariana. They both remembered the last time 3 wands had been drawn and no one had meant for anyone to die. The memory staggered them. The magic did not pause. The Elder Wand bucked in Grindelwald's grasp, furious at interruption, flaring with ancient instincts that cared nothing for human regret. The spells coiled around them faltered dangerously. Dumbledore moved first, not from anger, but from a terrible clarity. If he did not end this now, something worse than Ariana's death would echo across the world. He lifted his wand. The spell he cast was not explosive. It did not tear stone or shatter bone. It wrapped, Blue-white cords of light unfurled, weaving themselves through Grindelwald's swirling enchantments, sidestepping the Elder Wand's furious resistance, binding not body but possibility. For an instant, Gellert tried to wrench free, pouring power into a counter-curse that would have obliterated an army. Dumbledore matched it, jaw clenched, every line of his face carved in grief. The binding tightened. Light collapsed inward. Grindelwald fell. The courtyard slammed back into stillness. The stones cracked, walls scorched, sky above them bleeding slowly back into mundane cloud. A few charred flakes of snow drifted down as if bewildered. Albus descended after him, boots touching the broken flagstones with the quiet of someone arriving at a funeral too late to stop it. Gellert lay on his back, chest heaving, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The Elder Wand had flown from his hand and now lay several feet away, humming faintly, already seeking its next true master. Dumbledore did not pick it up. He looked at Gellert instead. For the first time in many years, there was no mask of leader, visionary, or Dark Lord on that face. Only the exhausted outline of a man who had reached for the world and found the limits of his own grip. Silence stretched. "Did you ever love me?" The words slipped out of Gellert almost conversationally, as though they were discussing some trivial theorem from their youth. But his eyes were too sharp for that. Albus closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. The admission seemed to cost him more than the duel. "And that," he went on, voice roughening, "is the reason I should have stopped you the moment I saw the path you were choosing. Love does not excuse what we become. It makes us more responsible for it." Gellert laughed once, a small broken sound, more exhale than mirth. "For the greater good," he whispered. Dumbledore flinched again. He did not answer. Instead, he raised his wand one last time, not to kill, to entomb. Nurmengard groaned as the sealing spell poured through it, corridors twisting, cells reshaping, wards folding inward on themselves until the fortress that had stood as the symbol of Grindelwald's inevitable rise became the instrument of his confinement. Runes flared along the walls, then dimmed to a slow, steady hum. Gellert Grindelwald disappeared behind them. The world would hear the official story later. Trial, conviction, lifetime imprisonment. But for those few who understood magic at its deepest, Nurmengard itself had become the verdict. Dumbledore stepped away from the silent stone. Some victories uplift the victor. This one simply left him older. Years passed. Wars ended. New fears replaced old. And the Muggle world stepped into an age of electricity and shadow. Wizarding governments revised laws, rewrote histories, filed Grindelwald's name into cabinets marked with caution and embarrassment. Nurmengard did not care. Snow layered its battlements. Winds gnawed at its towers. Inside, spells hummed the same unresolved chord day after day, year after year. In his cell high in the fortress, Gellert adjusted slowly to a world reduced to stone, sky, and thought. At first he paced, circling the room like a caged comet, mind racing across strategies, escape plans, hypotheticals. He listened for the subtle shifting of the war outside, measuring the way ideologies rose, flared, and fell. Time, relentless, did what years always do. The pacing slowed. He wrote in the air with his finger when quills were denied, tracing equations of power and resistance that dissolved before anyone else could see them. He tested the wards, not to break them, but to understand their construction. Albus's magic, his magic, the law's magic, braided together in ways no single mind could have managed. He thought of Ariana, not as martyr, not as excuse, but as a fixed point he could no longer evade. Her death, once a wound he covered with grand designs, became the lens through which his entire life refracted. How many Arianas, he wondered, had broken under the weight of fear, secrecy, and uncontrolled power? How many had his movement saved? How many had it endangered? There, in the quiet he had never allowed himself, he met the only opponent he had never truly faced, himself. It aged him faster than any duel. Outside, Dumbledore rose to lead Hogwarts, then the International Confederation, his name spoken with respect in halls that had once spoken Grindelwald's with dread. He defeated another rising darkness, guided generations of young witches and wizards, and carried always in some unwritten corner of his heart the knowledge of the boy he had loved and the man he had defeated. He never went back to Normengard. Perhaps he did not trust himself to. Decades later, long after the world had convinced itself that Grindelwald belonged more to history than to the present, another dark wizard climbed the mountain. He did not come with rhetoric. He came with hunger. Voldemort moved through Normengard like a contagion the wards had not been built to understand. The protections muttered and strained, confused by a creature whose soul did not ring human in their ancient senses. Doors that had stayed firm for half a century shook on their hinges as curses tore them open. The guards did not matter. They fell or fled. Only the cell at the highest point of the fortress mattered. Grindelwald heard him before he saw him. Footsteps, a crackle in the air, the subtle wrongness that accompanies magic torn from its moorings. He remained seated on the stone bench where he had watched so many winters slip past. The door slammed open. Voldemort stood framed in the archway, pale, serpentine, eyes like wounds that had learned how to hate. Gellert took him in with one long, assessing glance. "So," he said, voice raspy with disuse but steady, "the boy who split his soul to avoid death has come seeking the one wand that will not fix him." Voldemort's lipless mouth curled. "You know why I am here," he hissed. "Tell me where the Elder Wand lies, old man, and I may grant you a quicker end than you deserve." Grindelwald's gaze cooled, the old sharpness returning to his eyes like a blade catching light. "You mistake me for a man who fears endings," he replied. "I have watched more of them than you can comprehend." He studied Voldemort for a heartbeat longer. The absence of love, the obsession with conquest stripped of any larger purpose, the raw, ugly terror of mortality pulsing behind the bravado. Once he had told himself he was nothing like the monsters history produced. For the first time, he was almost grateful he had dreamed of the greater good at all. "You seek the wand of destiny," he said quietly. "Then you misunderstand destiny." Voldemort lifted his wand a fraction higher. "Tell me where it is." Grindelwald leaned back against the stone, suddenly very tired. "No," he said. The refusal was not defiant in the way his followers would have known. It was simple, final, a choice made by a man who had had far too long to think about what power had cost him, and what it might cost the world if placed in the hands of something even worse. "You cannot have it," he added, "and even if you did, you would not master it. There is a wizard you fear more than you admit. Even now, even from beyond the grave, the wand will never truly be yours while his shadow lies across your path." Voldemort's eyes blazed at the unspoken name. Dumbledore. A flash of green hatred boiled at his fingertips. "You will not win," Grindelwald said, almost gently, "not whilst his work outlives him." The killing curse struck. For an instant the world narrowed to green light, the smell of stone, the hiss of magic unmaking flesh. Then there was silence. No body for mourners, no eulogy, no monument, just a cell whose emptiness felt heavier than its occupancy had. Somewhere far away, a phoenix perched on the rafters of an old headmaster's office stirred, remembering a voice long gone and a summer that had changed everything. But Albus Dumbledore had already fallen from a tower by then, accepting death in his own complicated way. He never knew that in the end, Gellert Grindelwald's last act had been denial, not of guilt or history, but of aid to a darker successor. Perhaps it is better that he did not. Historians would argue for decades afterward. Some said Grindelwald died as he had lived, defiant, unrepentant, clinging to the last fragment of control he could exert. Others claimed that, in refusing Voldemort, he finally understood the responsibility that had always accompanied his brilliance, and that this small act of protection was the closest thing to redemption a man like him could achieve. The truth, as with all great figures, lived somewhere between legend and silence. What remains clear is this: a boy born on a winter night in a quiet European manor grew into a force that bent a continent around his will. He dreamed of Hallows, of a world guided by those clever enough to see its flaws, of a future where fear no longer broke fragile minds. He also broke people. He built a fortress from his convictions and died within its walls. He loved disastrously. He lost catastrophically. He faced a monster he should have understood and chose, in his final moment, not to help him. Not a monster, not a martyr, a man. Brilliant, dangerous, terribly human. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between battles and books, in the minds of those who study the past, not to repeat it, but to recognize it, his story remains, not as a template to admire, but as a warning carved in the shape of a life. Power without mercy will always call itself necessary. The task of those who come after is to answer and choose differently.